Good. Good evening. It is 6:01. Appears we have quorum. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for October 26, 2022. First item on our agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next item is the approval of minutes, the September 28, 2022 draft minutes. I'm sorry, I skipped over the roll call, yes. At committees, we don't, anyway.
No worries.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alder Allen. Alder Arata
Here.
Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Here.
Alder Maldonado is absent with excuse. Mayor Richardson.
Here.
Alder Strassman.
Here.
Alder Udell.
Here.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Very good, thank you. Now we can move on to the approval of minutes. Motion to approve the September 28, 2022 draft minutes.
Second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approval and a second discussion. Changes, corrections? Hearing none. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Noes? Ayes have it, motion carries. All right, moving on, public appearances for non-agenda items. We have no one registered in chambers or on Zoom. Thank you, Scott. Moving on to the agenda items. First item up is the 2023 proposed budget amendment process introduction. And Misty Dodge, our finance director, she will kick it off. Go ahead, Misty.
Thank you. So first I wanted to point out where the document is for those of you that are playing along at home. So there is a link in the packet for the Committee of the Whole meeting, but it's also available if you go to the City of Fitchburg website under Government and then Finance. And then there's this financial records and reports, and all the budget stuff is right here at the top. When you open that document, the easiest way to navigate it is to use the bookmarks, which are available here. There were 2 staff memos, so those are also bookmarked, so you can make sure you see those as well. When you're looking at the amendments, there were 9 total council proposed amendments and 4 omnibus or correction amendments that are put through by me. This summary here on page 2 just puts the title and then the amount. These color codings are important. The purple columns impact the property tax levy, which is the levy limit constraint that we're expecting to bump up against. The red column here for the general fund doesn't impact levy, but it does impact expenditure restraint. So as you're looking at these different things, that's why they're listed a little bit differently. And then if we go to an example amendment, first, there is a summary on here too of what these amendments, as we go through them, it will mean as far as levy limits and expenditure restraint and average tax bill for city purposes on the average home, as well as what the tax rate is going to be. You'll notice this year there's a lot more orange pending information as what there is other years. So just a reminder that this town of Madison absorption is a very unique issue that we continue to work through. So this is based on one option of how this could all be done, but it is far from final, and it will not be as close to final as it has been in other years. So everything that ends up being discussed as far as final numbers will all have to be with a grain of salt until that all gets worked out. Then looking at an amendment, as you're reading one of these, so the top right corner tells you which number it is, top left corner tells you what the property tax levy impact is, so that's really quickly observable. The boxes, the first box is supposed to be what the amendment is, the second box is why the amendment is suggested, and then the third box would be any notes that I might have from a finance director perspective, and then the account numbers are listed on the bottom for reference. That's all I have to talk about for logistics.
All right, very good. Thank you, Misty. Moving on, again, the 2023 proposed budget amendments. This is discussion only. No action will be taken. So we'll move right into amendment number 1. The sponsor is Alder Rada. Reduce median mowing and maintenance budget. And Alder, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yeah, so I am introducing this amendment because you will see, if you read the packet that I submitted another amendment to increase the forester position from 0.8 to full-time. So, and in order to find, the $21,000 that I needed to, to increase the 8 hours for that position, I needed to look in the budget where to reduce. And I started in the, Parks Department budget. And since I was looking at the median mowing contract and how much has increased from one year to the other one, and also there is a 20% contingency amount included there. I decided that I need to reduce this amount of the mowing and maintenance budget in order to cover for that position. I know that what I am doing is not the best thing. I know, believe I do this for living. But I needed to find a place where I can get the money. And then, and also this is something that we discussed in the tree committee. And this is an amendment that I am bringing forward because the tree committee members wants to increase Anna hours to full-time. And then the other thing that we have been talking in Parks Committee is how we can reduce the amount of, the cost of maintaining our medians and what we should be doing as a city in the future, maybe convert those grassy areas to a more sustainable platform like native plant or clover or another alternative. So reducing the ongoing maintenance saves the city money in the long term. Some other municipalities are converting some of the median, grass to another alternative option. So this is what I introduced this amendment. And I didn't know that you have another amendment similar to this, about median. So that's it. I know that this is if we if we accept doing that or we agree with this, we need to determine what we're going to do in the 2024 budget to find this $20,000. But I think we have a year ahead to find that money in our budget. So.
Very good. Before we move on to discussion, I do have one question. You speak to the 20% contingency included for 2023. Is the 20% equivalent to $20,000? Is that what you're seeking?
No, it's not. I don't think so, Missed, isn't it? No.
The full amount of the budget was about 90-something thousand, but the 20% contingency is for the additional park areas that would be added. I don't think it's a one-for-one because there's some stuff we knew was coming either way.
So
short
how
answer
do
is
we
no.
get to that 90,000 then?
The 90,000 in the budget. So there's two contracts technically that are associated with this project. Or you know what? Scott Endel, I believe, is on the screen, isn't he? Scott, would you like to take this one?
Certainly.
Excellent.
If you'd like me to, maybe just a little bit of history. Back in 2021, the Parks Department, we do maintain the medians, and we wanted to do a 3-year contract just due to it was difficult to find contractors to do this work, but try and provide some stability in that maintenance contract. And per my resolution, I did include in there, as the city continues to grow, including the town of Madison, along with some medians that are currently under contractual maintenance due to their reconstruction, we tried to estimate what that budget would look like, in 2021, what it would look like in 2023. So we did take a pretty deep dive into it. Regarding the 2022 budget, we're thinking that we're probably going to have around $12,000 remaining in those two contracts, but certainly in 2023 with the town of Madison coming on, along with some additional medians, that 20% contingency is going to be absorbed. And certainly, just to summarize that, with the $20,000 removed, it is, it's going to be tough to add these additional areas, but that's really the rationale behind the 20% contingency that we added in the contract when we did it in 2021.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Scott, can you also mention because I discussed this with Scott, and Scott said, no, Julie, I disagree with you. This is what he put in the memo. It's fine. Can you discuss the other option that you told me that maybe we can use an LTE to do some of this median work in the future?
Well, and that kind of, and you're right, Julie, and I certainly appreciate you reaching out to me. That was kind of the last bullet that I had there, that when this contract expires in 2023, it might make sense to take a look at the 2024 budget and potentially have full-time maintenance staff, substitute or replace these contracts. It's been difficult to find contractors to do this work. We're fortunate to have it, but certainly in 2024, I guess it would be a recommendation that we would, take a look at the 2024 budget when that season comes along and see if it wouldn't be more, certainly maybe budget neutral or more cost effective to hire a full-time staff to do the medians. I did include, we also have a City Hall campus maintenance staff position. So I'm thinking that all of these positions could be combined and potentially be a budget neutral type of substitution for 2024. But we are, kind of tied into the 2023 budget contract. So yeah, certainly I think it would behoove us to take a look at that potential consideration in 2024.
So with the medians, are you speculating that we would reduce mowing for all of the medians to come up with the additional dollars?
Well, what I'm speculating or estimating that it's going to be close, Randy, to take that $20,000 out of that 2023 contract amount. It's going to be close, and whether or not we can add those additional areas to the contract, it's going to be close, and certainly. What we did when Jordan, what he did is we budgeted for 22 mowings, if you would, and we had about 19 this year, as in talking to Jordan. So, there is a little bit of savings there. I can certainly appreciate that we want to get the forester to be full time, but full disclosure that it's going to be that 290 account may be pretty close at the end if we do take that $20,000 out of there, just as kind of a full transparency, full disclosure information.
Sure. I guess what is bothering me is the memo from you to Misty Dodge, and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph down. As for the increase in 2023, and you speak to medians west of Seminole Highway on McKee Road. Are you advocating then we remove all mowing of the medians west of Seminole and nothing east?
No, not at all. I'm just kind of indicating that was the reason for the 20% increase, because we were going to have additional maintenance requirements on the medians in 2023. So that's the justification behind the additional dollars for 2023. Along with, we've got, maybe 6 or 7 medians that with the town of Madison coming into our jurisdiction in 2023. So that was the rationale behind the contingency that we added to the contract for 2023. And again, we did this in 2021, so to some degree it was speculation, but it was an educated guess, if you would.
Okay, yes.
We'll Randy, we're going to get them. We'll get them maintained one way or the other. We're not going to maintain them. To your question, but it might be a little bit of a push for us.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure you will. You'll do a fine job. I just, and to some degree, I think we can move in this direction. I want to be careful where we pick and choose with medians and maybe something fair across all of the boards. When I saw west of Seminole, but nothing east of Seminole on McKee, I had some concerns. That's all. And I'm just wondering, is that part of your plan?
No, we'll get maintained one way or the other, all the medians that the city is responsible for.
Okay. Older Allen, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize for being late, but I actually had a relevant question to this very amendment. So, Scott, I happen to live now on Lacey Road over in Uptown. And there's medians on Lacey Road there. And there's a median that just happens to be about 25 feet from my door. And I happened to notice 3 times in the last couple of months that on Sundays, people were out there mowing the medians. So the question that I had is, are we paying overtime to people to mow these medians on Sundays?
No, those are the contract, they're contracted, so we're not paying overtime. Those are separate contractors, Jay. We have, with Resolution 7721 and Resolution 7821, we've got a maintenance, a mowing contractor that comes out and mows the medians. And we also have a separate landscape median contractor who pulls the weeds and gets them ready for the, fall cleanup, spring cleanup. So we actually have 2 different contractors that are doing the median maintenance, through Resolution 7721 and Resolution 7821. Those are not city employees. Those are contractual employees that are doing that work.
Well, I understand, but even within the terms of a contract, if the contractor has to pay overtime, I mean, the savings gets passed on to us. So that's why I wonder if we can, maybe within the terms of the contract, can we tell them to only do regular time employees? Or I don't, I mean, it just seemed odd to me to have someone mowing a median at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, I think we're set with the prices for 2023, and I guess we just kind of rely on the contractor they're only going to receive what the contracted price is, and if they're paying overtime and those kinds of things, I guess I'm not aware of that.
Go ahead.
Scott, this is Chad. To build on Jay's question in perhaps a different way, every time we're billed for a mowing, I assume they do one swoop across the city, mow all the medians, for instance, and then they send an invoice to the city for that particular work. If that is the case, is the invoice consistent, the same amount every time?
It is. It's per the contract amount, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Additional questions? Yes, Alder Gerhardt. Go ahead.
Thanks. So this is interesting to me because I know, as you all know, for number 8 of my memo is talking about putting some funding towards producing some sustainable street vegetation, which I think actually dovetails quite nicely with this, because it sounds like if we choose to reduce the mowing and maintenance budget, the potential one way to fix that is to choose some medians to not mow. And if we're going to potentially pilot sustainable vegetation, which I would very much encourage us to consider, this would almost be kind of a push to make sure that that happens, because the funding will be somewhat limited. It would behoove us to choose some medians to really pilot this on. And with an increase in our forest and natural hours, she might have some more time to dedicate to figuring out where those locations are, what types of plants we want to pilot. I actually think it dovetails quite nicely all together. And we talked a little bit about this last year, actually quite a lot about this last year when I proposed that amendment, same as number 8. I did that last year, and we had quite an extensive conversation. And to my recollection, the council as a whole thought that in general, the idea of sustainable street median vegetation was a good idea. I personally think it's kind of absurd that we have people in ride-along mowers on these very, very narrow strips of grass on a busy road. It just always struck me from all the time as kind of an absurd concept that we do that, both from just a practicality standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. Every time I'd have to drive by one of those workers, it makes me nervous in a way that I think is just sort of unnecessary. So I think maybe the potential, obviously Scott said that they want to maintain all these medians, but I think maybe if we do this, the choice would be like, let's decide where we're going to pilot this, and let's make an intentional choice to pilot some sustainable street vegetation. And it'll push us to do it because, right, necessity is the mother of invention. Like if we have a lower budget, we're going to need to figure out what to do. So that's I wanted to throw that out there as kind of looking at as these series of amendments sort of in a comprehensive way.
Oh, very good. Just as a follow-up to your statement, then, do you have an area that we should pilot? And that's when I saw the email or the memo. I'm going to go back to Seminole Highway again, west of Seminole and not east of Seminole. Do you have a suggested location from your experience?
That's a great question. I do not. I mean, I think that ultimately, I think the best location is potentially, there's two ways you could do it. You could choose a place that's high traffic, which would make the most sense, I think, to not mow on a regular basis, just given the danger to the workers, in my opinion. This is my personal opinion, so like not expert, but I would say one of the busier roads, like McKee or Fish Hatchery, section on there, or potentially a place that's just easier to access. So something that's much more in a neighborhood that's easier for staff to get to regularly. I think it can go either way. I also think it really depends greatly on which plants are decided. I do think that potentially different plants are going to be appropriate in different areas of the city. So, for example, if you do natives, you might have to do a burn every 3 years. So certain roads, you're not going to necessarily want that on Fish Hatchery Road. You might not be able to do a burn, but maybe you do a wildflower, you do some sort of clover. There's different options. So that would be, so I guess my answer is no, but I do think that I've had a lot of conversations with Anna Healy about this, and Alder Rutherford can comment. I believe that the Parks Commission has had discussions about this issue as well, about choosing different plants. So there's definitely there's already been some conversation about this. I don't think it's completely coming out of left field. Obviously, this would really push us to make those choices. But I definitely think we could talk about that maybe at a committee of the whole meeting or at a Parks Commission. We could have an open conversation about where those selection places could be. So we could have further discussion on it.
Sure. Mayor Richardson had his hand up first. If you want to go ahead. You have the
Sure,
floor.
yeah. Back in college for a summer, I actually worked for the Parks Department, and one of the things I did was actually mow the medians in the city and along Fish Hatchery Road. We had a push mower. It wasn't one of the riding ones, but it was interesting to do. So I have experience actually in this. I think my biggest concern with taking out the entire contingency is that there's so many unknowns. We are adding a lot of new neighborhoods, and there's new areas to mow. To me, looking at this, if it was 10,000, I think that'd be fine. If it was half of it, I do have concerns with it taking the whole thing out. I think that Scott has some interesting ideas for going forward in the future to have like a summer LTE, people like that, to possibly do this instead. But to me, my biggest concern is just with unknowns, the gas price, who knows what gas prices are going to be at if there's additional charges for stuff like that. I would not want to put ourselves in the risk of taking away the entire contingency. If it was half of it, like 10,000, I mean, I think that'd be fine. But I guess that'd be my biggest concern is that we don't want to cut things so thin that we have no wiggle room whatsoever. And I think we're getting a little bit off track by talking about doing plantings and things like that. I think that's a great idea as well. There needs to be some planning on that, but I worry about that if it is really less expensive, only because Madison is actually kind of transitioning away from some of these types of things. And I don't know that it's truly apples to apples, but they seem to think that some of these types of plantings are more expensive for maintenance. And I don't know that it's completely the same as what we want to do. I'm getting off track myself now, but I think that's a great idea. I think a lot of times those look better anyway than just grass. And so, if it's all things being equal, I probably would go for that. But in terms of this and for next year, I think it's a mistake to cut the entire contingency. But if it was like half of it, I'd be fine with someone amending it to that.
Alder Wheeler, you have the floor.
Yeah, and I was somewhat along the same lines. I mean, have we done any studies? Have we looked at other cities? I kind of get concerned when we just jump into things and we really don't look, it's all an idea, and we really don't do the research, and we're cutting, like the mayor was saying, we're just going to take all this funding out, and then what happens in the future? And my concern always has been, we're going to be bumping up against the tax levy. And I think we got to be really, really careful, the decisions that we make now, because I'm hoping that Scott's then not going to ask for more people, and all of a sudden to do what we are supposed to be doing. So that's my concern. Are we looking at other cities to see what they have done, to see whether this has even worked out?
Alder Gerhart.
Thanks. So I had a lot of conversations about this at that conference I was at last week. There are actually landscape architects that consult with municipalities on this very issue. I kind of talked through a couple potential different options that cities have been considering. I have not been in contact with any particular cities. If we had funding for it, I would be all about making calls. I know Anna would be interested as well, but there's always that chicken before the egg, right? If we don't have funding for it, doing the research and figuring out the exact details just isn't worth the time, because there's no funding behind it. So I feel like until we are going to put some money there, I don't think we're ever really going to figure out exactly what works for the city. But there are options out there, and there are municipalities doing interesting things. I do think that I personally think that natives might be a little more complicated than is needed for such a small strip of grass. But there are other things that, they're not technically native, but they're sustainable in the way that we won't have to mow them in the future. And I agree. I think the levy's we're gonna come against the levy, and these mowing costs are gonna keep going up and up and up, or we're gonna have to add staff. I think at some point we're gonna need to transition, and it's either gonna be we're at the point where we can't mow, so we just have to let things grow, or we start making that transition to something different. But yes, my response is yes, there are municipalities doing this.
Can I just follow up? I'm not talking about needing a study. I'm just talking about when I'm talking about police stuff, and I just called and asked, what were the landmines of going through stuff. So I don't think we always need a study to do things. I'm just talking about calling other municipalities that have gone through this and say, what were the issues going in? So I don't always think we need a study to do things.
Alder
May I
Rada.
respond?
Sure.
I didn't mean a study. I meant Anna Healy's not just going to spend a whole bunch of time calling people and I won't either until I have a certainty that we're going to do it. So I did not mean a study. I just meant exactly what you said, making calls and figuring out what people are doing.
I think we're clear there. Alder Rada.
Yeah, I want to, Jim, in Park Commission, we have talked a lot about this, and in our committee, we have two architecture designers that they are in parks, and they know a lot about this. And one of the things that we discussed is there are different type of grass, that they don't grow, that they can be easy to maintain. And also, we have the university here that they have, they do this type of research on different type of grass and all of that. So there are a lot of options that we can maybe collaborate with the university to understand, but there are grasses that they don't grow and they are easy to maintain. That maybe we can start looking for other options. Or clover could be another option too, So we have, have this, this discussion about, because we discuss this when we are developing new parks too, how we are going to maintain future parks. So this is all the discussion about type of grass, native plants, you know what I So that this is why this is something that I have heard about in Park Commission and the Tree Committee. About how we can bring other options to maintain medians.
Very good. Further discussion? Hearing none, we will move on to our next amendment. Amendment number 2. The sponsor is Alder Gerhardt, and it's reallocate Fitchburg Star ad funding to city newsletter. Alder, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So, Alder, you just said the name. So this is something I've mentioned a few times, and I know Chad has given updates about. But I think you all will recall that earlier this year, the Fitchburg Star stopped distributing to a significant number of addresses, but would not give us a clear indication of who those people are. I was in contact with several of those individuals, some of which are people that don't have internet access in the home because they don't have the funds to be able to pay for that monthly fee. And so the Fitchburg Star was kind of their touch point to city news. They relied on it to find out about things. It dovetailed with the Metro network redesign, which was really devastating for certain individuals because they weren't getting that city information about the Metro redesign. All that is to say that the Fitchburg Star stopped distributing, and for a long time the city has been relying on the Star for communications to residents, and because of that, we paid for a monthly ad, a full-page ad where staff submitted different information for inclusion for the residents. And that ad space totals $16,800 a year in the budget. I personally, I had a lot of conversations with Chad about this to see, what could the Star do in order to restart service to these areas and potentially also add Southdale. And my understanding is that those conversations stalled and there was no determination left. And in my personal opinion, I'm not sure that we should be paying the Star quite so much money if they're not actually going to deliver to all of our residents. And so I would prefer that if we're going to put that money in the budget, that we do something to communicate directly with our residents, make sure that it goes to every single person in the city of Fitchburg that pays taxes and lives here and relies on our services, and just let the Fitchburg Star do what they're going to do. And obviously, that's going to take some staff effort, and I appreciate that, and I acknowledge that that's an unfortunate consequence of having to do a city newsletter. But I don't think we would do it monthly. Chad obviously was going to have to, maybe hopefully Chad can comment on this too, but I just think we have to, if we're going to spend this much money, I think we should be communicating with all of our residents, and in particular, it seems like the Star has cut off the most vulnerable residents, the ones that are least likely to have access to other news outlets and internet access. And that, I think, personally, is just a huge, huge equity issue that we can't ignore. So that's why I've put together this amendment to reallocate the funding.
Alder Allen.
Yeah. First of all, I fully support this. I'm going to start with that. Our relationship with the Fitchburg Star has been a little choppy as of late. So I remember, Aaron probably does too, when the Fitchburg Star actually had delivery boys and girls who would take it to every residence in the city. They would just actually deliver it back in the late 80s, early 90s. After a time, they stopped doing that because they couldn't find enough kids who wanted to deliver the newspaper. So they contacted the city, and it was largely ad supported, but not the city ad. The city didn't take out an ad. So for a time, it ceased publication. So there was no Fitchburg Star for several years. And then, and during that hiatus, the city started doing its own newsletter. I don't remember, it wasn't monthly. I don't remember if it was quarterly or if it was bi-monthly, but we did our own newsletter. Each department had a little column in there to talk about what's going on in, the senior center or recreation or garbage collection or whatever. And that was where people got their garbage collection calendar that, when I would go into customers' homes, I'd see it magneted to the refrigerator so they would remember which weeks were recycling weeks. The Fitchburg Star then came to the city. God, I want to say it was in 2007 or 2008, and said, "Hey, we want to restart this publication." And a number of city staff were basically getting tired of writing little columns every 3 months to put in the thing, so in the newsletters. So we agreed to with the Fitchburg Star that we would take out a full-page ad every month, that we would provide them with the addresses. We would provide them with the addresses of every dwelling unit in the city, and away we go. And so they would deliver it to everybody. As far as I'm concerned, they've breached that agreement. Now, my office is on Greenway Cross, up next to the KFC. My office is in the city of Madison. And in my office building, there are about 16 or 17 different businesses. Some of the spots in that building are vacant, and because I have the biggest mailbox up there, because sometimes I get parts, the people who have the vacant units, if mail comes to them, they often just get thrown in my mailbox. So there are months, my building is not even in the city of Fitchburg, and there are some months, some weeks where I will get 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 copies of the Fitchburg Star in my mailbox that isn't even in Fitchburg, while they are neglecting residents who have lived in this city for many years. I just moved over to Lacey Road in a building that did not exist in May of this year. The building now exists, people are living in it, and there wasn't a day that got missed that we suddenly started getting the Fitchburg Star in that brand new building, while people who are established residents who have been living here a long time don't get it. So at this juncture, I really don't care what happens to the Fitchburg Star. The $16,000 will probably cause it to cease publication, and I don't care. They are not doing what they agreed to do. They are not doing a service for the city, and we should not continue to throw our money away on a service that is not providing what they promised. Thank you for your support.
Additional discussion? Yes, Alder Rutherford, go ahead.
So, Chad, you sent us a map this afternoon, and one of my biggest concerns is, if I look at this map, it means that the South Day neighborhood, the new part of the town of Madison that we are getting, they are not going to have access to this. So how we are going to communicate to those neighbors about what is going on in the city of Fitchburg? You know what I mean? So, and I agree with Gabriela's comment about this is an equity issue, because, you look at all the wealthy neighborhoods or more established, they are receiving the publication. And if you look in the map, some of the low-income areas are not getting the newspaper. Even the section in Chad, on the east side, on the MM, that one is the new Terravesa subdivision. They are not getting that either, is it? So, so I think we need to, I think this is a great opportunity for us to discuss what we want to do with this. And one of your considerations, Chad, that you add in your memo is talking about what this, if we remove this funding to the paper, how it's gonna affect the paper future. That one is the paper management to decide. It's not our, we shouldn't even consider that, you know what I mean? So I think that we need to discuss what we want to do with this, because, I don't think that we need to pay for something that is not all of our residents are getting the information, so.
Thank you. Mayor Richardson, you have the floor.
Yeah, I guess I think, again, kind of half measures. I think cutting it down to a half-page ad makes a lot of sense to me, and reallocating that money. And part of it is because there's not a more efficient way to reach our, virtually 80-90% of our residents on a monthly basis. Because I think it says in here that the estimate to mail something to all residents is like over $11,000. So if we reallocate this money, that's only getting us like one mailing a year. If we cut it in half, my hope, without doing the math and know anything, is that we could do a mailing at least quarterly to those communities that aren't getting it right now, Southdale, West Fitchburg, because it is criminal that they aren't sending this to all the residents in Fitchburg. That's a horrible thing. But that might be one way for us to still efficiently get to 80% of the residents and then at least have some money to hopefully 4 times a year reach out to these other neighborhoods so that they have some information and we can get to them, since the Fitchburg Star isn't. I mean, a year or two ago, the Fitchburg Star was bought by a different company and the quality has gone down, but there is a value to having the Fitchburg Star, and I know that people appreciate having that news outlet for local. It was better a few years ago, but I think there is value to that, and there is value in reaching at least 80% of our residents in an efficient manner. But I do think at least kind of to a half a page makes a lot of sense, and reallocating that money to some kind of a newsletter for those other areas.
Yes, Alder Herbst.
I agree with most everything that's been said. That it is a private business and they're driven by ads. So if any of you grew up in a small town like I did, you've seen your local newspaper that was very, very good when I was growing up. Now trickle away into nothing, where they're just copying stuff from national. And it really, it's just I hate to say it, but it's a society we live in. There's reduced ad revenue, so they can't spend as much money. If we go to, I don't want us going to, we move away from this and we're spending twice as much to get the word out. The thing I would suggest to us, whatever we come up with, is a plan for placing kiosks in our park so that our newsletter can be placed in each of these parks, when the park staff goes around monthly, as people are frequenting our parks, all the areas. And I'd like to see that done. Then, most people live within walking distance of one of our parks, almost everyone. I don't know anyone that doesn't in Fitchburg, except maybe in District 4, in the rural areas. But then that's another method of getting the news out. If you're on a walk, you go to the park, you stop, and you're probably more likely to read it than with the other junk mail that comes into your house. So thank you.
Yes, Alder Allen, go ahead.
Yeah, Aaron, I appreciate your position on this. My position on this is I do not want to give this company one more penny. And I'm not necessarily driven by efficiency on something like communicating with the taxpayers of the city. It's something that should be done. There may be other ways that we can explore, like, for the people who get utility bills, maybe we can put an additional page in the utility bill, and that, we can maybe put 1 or 2 pages in there. It won't cost any additional postage. It's just the price of printing the pages. And for the people who aren't, we'll have to mail to them directly. But, many of the people, most of the residents of the city get a utility bill, and that would just cost us the price of printing something every other month or every quarter or whatever. I feel that what the promises that were made to us back in 2007, 2008 have not been kept. They aren't even trying. And the way that they do not communicate with us, I mean, how long have we been asking for a map of where this goes? It's been at least 6 months. And the fact that they couldn't crap one out until today is ridiculous. So, and maybe they knew there's a budget amendment that says we're going to cut out all the funding. Well, that's hopefully what's going to happen here. That's not a professional way of dealing with a municipality who you claim to be trying to serve. So like I said, I fully support this amendment as it is, and I think we need to explore some other ways of getting the word out to our residents.
All right, very good. Yes, Alder, excuse me.
No, I'm
not an alder yet.
No aspirations for elected office.
City
Trust me
administrator.
on that.
Chad Brecklin.
I'm as deep into politics as I need to be.
He can't afford the pay cut.
Yeah.
couple of items is, Jay, do just want to clarify that that map was not provided by Wisconsin Media Group. That map was created by city staff based upon our ability to finally
so they
locate
didn't even do
a
it today.
USPS route map. So we were finally able to track one of those down today, and our GAS coordinator was able to plot this out to at least give approximations on where the star is currently being distributed. I certainly can appreciate the conversation here and the feelings of the council, and I do just want to state the fact that whatever solution we come up with, we have to be cognizant of what its impact is going to be on staff and their ability to create, publish stuff, mail, whatever the case may be. I think there is zero capacity to take on any additional responsibilities besides what we are already doing, which is providing the content to the star, and then the star goes ahead and puts it into an ad format. One of the reasons we looked at the outsourcing to kind of get an idea is because of that very fact that we can still continue to provide the content, but we need somebody to organize it, put it together, and make it look graphically appealing. Because we know that there's a limited attention span of the reader, right? Once they get the mail, they're going to make a decision in, I think, what is it, Jim, about 7 seconds? You know, whether they're actually going to look through this piece of mail that they're not expecting or not. So I think we have to be very cognizant of how we design these sorts of things to be attention grabbing and try to grab someone's ability to read that. Perhaps the best course of action may be to provide direction that we're no longer going to utilize the star for this, but still to identify alternative options, whether that is utilizing the utility bills, which I can already recognize a couple of pitfalls there already through previous conversations, and I see Misty shaking her head as well, or working with our existing contractor to see if there are ways in which they could reduce the cost. You know, go down to a one-page newsletter that's, you know, instead of a 3-page newsletter. You know, those sorts of things that we might be able to identify additional solutions for the council to consider on how they would want to proceed. But I just want to be cognizant of the fact that we have to be careful of what we're going to expect staff to try to put together on this, because this is not necessarily, you know, a typical strong suit of government employees developing newsletters that are graphically appealing. And no, I mean that with no disrespect to our teams. There's a lot of talent out there.
All right, now back to the Alder Errata Frada that I saw 2 hands go up at once.
Yeah, and then you. Okay, so my question, you know, I agree with you, Chuck, what you said, but also I am concerned that, you know, that the new Southdale neighborhood and some of the other area in District 1, what we're going to do, what is the plan to reach out to them, especially now that we are an extension, 1,500 new people. How we are going to communicate with them? And don't tell me Facebook and the website, because I'm going to go ballistic. You know what I mean? So how we are going to, you know, this is the question that we need to also determine what we're going to do. What is the plan? Even if we say, okay, let's stay with the Fitchburg Star for now. Okay, but my other question is, what is the percentage of houses that they don't get today, the newspaper in the city? Is 20%? Because the mayor say 80% of the houses are receiving. So I assume in 20%, but is this the correct percentage?
Well, if I recall correctly, there's about 16,000 addresses in the city.
Okay.
Based upon my looking into this particular
16, okay.
Memo, and if I can do my math on the fly, it was 12,500 divided by 16,000. Misty, you probably know this off the top of your head. 78% of the city is receiving the star based upon that. You know, Dave might have a solid idea here as far as an informational kiosk. I would take it one step further, though, and make it a digital kiosk. That way we don't have to have staff going out there to put paper repeatedly, but we might have some sort of digital kiosk that was there that would allow people to scroll through, check city meetings, check agendas and minutes, check recreational programming, whatever the case may be. where that could be located, for instance, at Hub Phase 1, Southdale Park, Jamestown Hugo Park, Belmar Park. I mean, we could identify a plan, obviously, as to what that might cost to implement such an option. I'm not disputing that it won't be expensive at all, but your other option is an expensive monthly newsletter, expensive payment to staff or other LTEs to go out and stuff mailboxes. There isn't an inexpensive solution to this that captures every single residence.
Alder Gerhard.
Can I ask what the process is right now? Because we obviously have to put together content every single month in order to get it to the Star.
Yeah.
So what's happening?
Yeah, Lisa Sanford spearheads that process. She typically has a running list of what might be of the most interest during any given period of time. Like brush collection time, yard waste, recreational programs, snow plowing information, alternate side parking, again, depending upon the time of year. So she will go ahead and coordinate with the departments to supply that particular information. Some of the stuff may not change year to year, right? Alternate side parking, for instance, remains static information. And there are many other pieces of information. So she collects that. She then forwards it off to the Star. They put it in the ad format for us and print it, mail it.
So they're doing the graphic design.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Could I continue?
Sure, go ahead.
So I guess so there is staff content generation happening monthly. Anyway, okay, it's just a matter of designing it because I think that obviously what's quoted here in the memo is a 3-page newsletter. That is a big lift, to write an article, that's huge. I think potentially you could do something like a postcard where it's very similar to the format of the Star, where it's just listing information. It doesn't have to be pretty; it just has to be there. And maybe you do an annual mailing that includes all that basic information: alternate street parking, garbage collection, and just the numbers. How someone without internet access, how do you find out who to call? How would you know who to call if there was a public works issue on your block? There's no way to know because we rely so much on the internet and they're not getting anything in their mailbox. So I think there's other options besides, I actually think a 3-page newsletter is kind of an overwhelming idea, but maybe a big 6x11 postcard, 4 times a year, maybe is about equivalent in terms of work as a monthly, collection of information. And maybe if we reduce the cost to a 4 times a year postcard, maybe we'd have enough to ask a graphic designer to put together a template. Because that exists too, where it's here's a template and we're just plugging information in. This is the same template for yearly information. We do the same mailer every year for annual information. So obviously this is just brainstorming, which is what I was hoping this conversation would be anyway. But I think there are ways to make it not as much of a lift as it might seem initially, and maybe change the format to make it more workable for staff. And I think the money, if we use this money, I think potentially we have enough to make that happen for this year. I didn't get a call from the Fitchburg Star when this was published. I was kind of surprised by that. I'm not sure how much they're paying attention to the city news. And I was hoping that maybe that they would wake up and be like, oh, maybe we should talk to the city and figure out a solution. Because my first inclination was to pay them, give them some more money to increase distribution. But ultimately, I'm at the point where I don't want to give money to an organization, a private organization, taxpayer money to a private organization that is ignoring the least resourced neighborhoods. Even if it's only a half-page ad, it's still half of that money is going to neighborhoods that are very affluent, that can get information online, that have Facebook. And the neighbors that don't have internet access, that have to take a bus 45 minutes to a Madison library because they can't get to the Fitchburg library on the bus, they're the ones that aren't getting the Fitchburg Star. And it just is, it's so wrong that and that's taxpayer money, that the people that are paying for that, they're the ones that most need that information. They also pay taxes, and they're not getting it. And I feel like we have to figure out something else. I just don't think I think it's wrong. And I think it's wrong for the most and it's not our fault that stopped, but I think we have to do something about it. And I do really sympathize with it being staff time, but I don't think we have it's unfair. I just want to throw that out there.
Alder Herbst, you have the floor.
Just a comment, I like to stay away from this, everything can be in equity. They did it by zip code. It was a poor decision, but what I would say, there's one thing, the most valuable thing we send out is the refuse collection schedule. If we only sent out one thing, that would be it. That's the most important thing. Everyone's got it up on their cupboard. That's what we need to focus on. That's what has to go out. That's what our residents need the most. And so let's keep a focus on that.
So I just checked. The nonprofit bulk rate for postage for a letter is about 18 cents a piece, which is going to run about $3,000 in postage per each one of these that we send out. Now, I don't know that we need to do it in a form of a letter. We don't need to pay for an envelope. We can find, a different way to if it's something that's going to be folded and sealed, or Gabriella's suggestion of just a 6x11 postcard. I think that's a great idea. I am quite confident that I can find somebody in the city of Fitchburg who does graphic design who would donate some time to do this every couple of months. I mean, a 6x11 card, I've laid these out myself. I have Adobe Illustrator. I know how to do that. It takes an hour if you move slow. And I move slow because I don't know what I'm doing. So for somebody who's a professional, they should be able to knock that out in 30 minutes. And I suspect in exchange for having a logo on a postcard that says, hey, we did this layout, there are people who would be willing to do that if we're paying the postage to send it out. There's a lot of ways that there's a lot of things we can explore here that are options for getting this done, getting a better product out, getting it distributed more widely to our residents, and maybe even doing it in a more efficient manner, maybe. But, the method we have now is a failure. It's an utter failure. It is a total, utter failure. And I don't want to throw one more penny at it.
Chad.
So I think the conversation has been very beneficial and has provided some additional options that could be explored. I think what we could potentially do with I guess, direction of the council is, again, continue to evaluate what options might be available, keeping in mind the funds that have been established for next year's budget, the 16.8, I think it was. And, at least working with one vendor for ideas on how we could potentially do a quarterly newsletter, whether that is a 6x11 postcard or some other sort of format that would keep us within the designated budget, but yet reach all 16,000 addresses, or approximately 16,000 addresses. And I also think it would be helpful, in addition to the refuse and recycling information, if we knew, what are the goals and objectives of the information that needs to be shared with our residents that the council would like to see. Identify what that is for staff. Obviously, we can work on putting together our own suggestions as well, but to make sure that we focus on those pieces of information that we feel are the most critical, since we may have less space available to convey those messages. So if that's a way to move forward with this, I certainly can take the lead on coordinating with staff to continue to gather some additional options. And we could ideally be ready to roll with something for first quarter of next year. And again, we can also internally compile that list of information that we feel is important to share, and then coordinate with the council to confirm that we've covered the bases that you want to see.
Very good.
Sounds like another committee of the whole meeting.
Could be. Great discussion. Moving on to amendment number 3. The sponsor is Alder Arata Frada. Increase urban forester naturalist position from 0.8 to FTE to full-time. Go ahead.
Yes, so this amendment is to increase the forester position, as I mentioned before, to full-time. So that one this is an option that we discussed in the tree committee, has the support of the tree commission. If you look at the rationale for the position, at the beginning, this position, one of the jobs, there are so many that she does, is in charge of the, planting tree. And in general, on average, this job was designed to plant about 100 trees per year. But now, if you look at the numbers, the number has grown sometimes significantly from one year to another one. But the other comment that we discussed in the tree commission is that it's not only planting the tree. It's another point that we need to consider is that the more trees we plant, the more tree maintenance that we need to do in order to keep those trees healthy. So the job of Anna in the last couple of years has increased significantly. So we are working on also in the tree ordinance too. So that is going to come to us eventually next year. So the idea is to, how we can add. We are adding only 8 hours more to convert this position to a full position. So that's it.
Discussion.
And also there are some, sorry, Randy, there are more information in the rationale about how many acres of parks on land we have in our system too. There are more subdivision coming that we need to take care of the tree or plant tree,
Discussion. Alder Gerhardt.
Yeah. Well, you guys probably could predict what I'm going to say before I even say it, but I definitely support this, and I think that Anna is long overdue for a full-time position. I think that she can do a lot more for the city if she goes full-time. I did have a conversation with Scott about this, and also Anna, about the fact that her position is entirely within parks and entirely within the tax levy as a result of that. But her position is actually much more of a consultant throughout the city. Like, she consults with plan department, with stormwater, and hopefully we'll be doing more collaboration with our new environmental engineer talking about native plantings and stormwater facilities. And I believe also building inspection and public works in different scenarios. So she's consulting with all sorts of different departments. So I talked to them potentially about looking at her position description and figuring out what the breakdown is, because perhaps this position is a good candidate for being funded through multiple funding sources. So not just through the Parks Department, but more representative of her actual day-to-day work, which is much more broader than just parks. So potentially that could create more of a stable funding going forward. But ultimately, she just doesn't have enough time to do the work that she's trying to do, and trees are part of what makes people want to live here, because we've got some of these beautiful neighborhoods that have established trees, is something that people, when they drive through, that makes them want to be here, that makes them want to stay in the city of Fitchburg. And then at the same time, trees are also a very, very important part of stormwater retention by having deep tree roots, and they're also a good carbon capture and storage, natural for to reduce climate change impacts. So, and not to mention the fact that increased heat, creating tree cover actually decreases the heat of urban areas, which could be very good for certain areas of town, which are much more on the urban end of the spectrum. So there's a lot more benefits to trees than just their beauty, but I think there's a lot of reasons supporting this, and I think the reduction is a good fit for this, because I think if Anna had one more day a week, I think we could start maybe working towards figuring out how to replace that street median vegetation to something more sustainable that will not require weekly mowing. And she might have the time to put towards that. Thanks.
Mayor Richardson.
I think the only concern I have with this is that when we asked budget department heads for their budgets, I said, when it comes to positions, I want to know what's your top position for your department and tell me what that is. And if there's a second one, what's your second one? And this isn't a position that the department head put in there. So what that tells me is the department head doesn't think that this is a priority. We did put this from 60 to 80% last year, which is great. And then I was going to do that in this budget if it didn't happen in last budget. And I think that's very important to do. But I guess the concern I have is that we're kind of going around the department head who I asked, what are your at least top two priorities? And it wasn't in the top two priorities of the department head. And now we're saying, well, we don't care what you think, department head, we're going around you and adding this anyway. So I guess that's just my big concern, is that I asked department heads what your top two priorities. This wasn't one of them, but we're saying we know better what we should do for staffing in the department instead.
Go ahead, Alder Gerhart.
Can I ask a question? Because I don't know if if the department heads, they were proposing increases because an increase from 80% to 100% is a little different than asking for a new position. I assume that a lot of staff heads ask for new positions because everyone needs more help. Like, if I had to choose top two, I would definitely choose a new staff versus just an increase in staff hours. I just wanted to clarify about how that question was asked, if people were just looking to add positions rather than increase hours.
It was either a brand new position or increasing a position to more hours. Either way would be one of the options there. And I don't know, Misty, did they even request two positions in this department?
So the parks position that I remember is the reclassification of one of the existing workers to a lead worker. So in those two, it would also be if there was a reclassification of an existing position, would count it towards that. I don't recall if there was another parks request.
So I don't know that they even requested two positions. So
Scott, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, well, actually what I did include originally was two seasonal Southdale Park recreational staff, along with an increase in the recreation department for the referees to $30. So those were the two departmental requests that we did have. And I know Bill did submit on behalf of the Parks Department the lead worker for park maintenance. So we certainly, there's a lot of needs, that's for sure. And we did have to prioritize, so that's how we came down.
Alder Wheeler.
Yeah, just a comment. Gabrielle, I'm glad you mentioned more stuff that Anna does, because I did actually have a long conversation with her also. My issue with this is always going to be we need to plan this stuff out. This kind of seems like piecemeal, because what makes this position any more important than when I talked to developers and they said that they wish they would have more people in planning so that they could get their processes through that cost them a lot of money when they're delayed. And I guess we are going to be having a staffing study, am I right, Chad, coming up. And I just wish that we could get all this stuff where we plan it out instead of kind of like, piecemeal of trying to come up and say, well, this may be more important. But I do understand. It's a lot of work. But in the scheme of the whole city, I don't know where this would really stand. And I agree with the mayor. If the department heads, if it was important to them because she's going to be working under a department head, then they should have actually put this in.
Thank you. Alder Rada-Frada.
Yeah, so I want to mention that it wasn't something new to Scott. I already discussed this with Scott. I asked Anna about this. We discussed this in the tree committee. So it wasn't like we went behind the head of the department with this position. It was, Scott knew that I was coming with this amendment. So because I introduced this amendment last year to increase from 0.6 to 0.8. So the idea is that I understand that this is not coming. I think it was a process and a lot of discussion to bring this amendment to tonight. It wasn't like because I decided I want to give it more hours to Anna, I want to do it. No. So there are more discussion on this. And the question is, I know that if we are, this is the best opportunity for us as a council to discuss what are the future needs of the city, or what position are that we need to look up for the following budget cycle. And I think also I mentioned to you, Aaron, one time I said something, about it should be great to increase that position. I think I mentioned to you I would say before when you were working on your in your budget. So as this is opportunity to discuss, even though some of you may disagree with that, but for me it's an opportunity to also to have this discussion as a council, and determine maybe for next year when we see this amendment coming back, or we have a staffing plan. Maybe in the staffing plan it will be the need to increase those hours, but it's also this is the place for us to have this type of discussion, because we don't have it so often and we cannot do it. So I will say something is coming for the tree committee. I bring it forward to you guys. This is what we discussed. We discussed it with Anna. Scott knew about that this was coming, so no one was doing this behind closed doors. So that's it.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions before we move on? Hearing none, we will move on to amendment number 4. And sponsor is Alder Rada-Frada. Increase tree advisory committee meetings from 6 to 8 annually. And Alder, would you like to speak to your amendment?
So this is talking about tree, and this is something that we discussed in the tree committee. The tree committee wants to increase the meeting from 6 to 8. We are doing, our role as a TAC is to include a standard practice to review land development proposal now. Then we also we are an advisory for the city forester. We are also working on the tree ordinance. And so we decided that, if there is room in the budget to increase 2 more meetings for the year, it will be great. So, and then the funding for this amendment will come from the capacity left in the 2023 proposed budget. Thank you, Misty, for calculating how much it's going to cost all of this. So that's all.
Very good, thank you. Discussion? Alder Gerhardt.
Tree advisory has a lot of great discussions. I think if they had a couple more meetings a year, I think they could comment on a lot more. And I think there's a lot of stuff that they could tackle if they had more time. I loved serving on that commission, and I definitely support a couple more meetings. I'd be excited to see what they could bring to the city with some extra time.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we will move on to amendment number 5. The sponsor is Alder Rada-Frada. Add HNI grant funding to Southdale neighborhood in well-being fund. All right, go ahead, Alder.
Yeah, so this amendment is to add, how much it was? To increase 15,000 the funds in the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative Grant Program to be allocated to the Southdale neighborhood, because now we have a 4th neighborhood in the Healthy Neighborhood program. So, and the funding for this will come from the Well-Being Fund that it was established in the 2021 budget. It was the amendment number 23, and it's projected to have a balance of $18,000 in 2023. And the mission of that fund, that it was an amendment that Alder Gerhardt put together, aligns with the purpose of this amendment, because one of the purpose of how to use this well-being fund was to, for example, using in the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, among others. So we have only $63,000 allocated for the 2023 budget for this grant initiative. And I think with the new neighborhood area, adding 15,000, from that fund will be great. Or, there are $18,000 in the fund, but if we can, I can compromise if you don't feel comfortable with 15. We can allocate 10,000, but I think we need to allocate some funding for that new neighborhood.
Thank you. Alder Gerhardt.
I just wanted to piggyback off that and just mention the well-being fund for those that weren't on the council back in 2020 during that process, just to explain. So in 2020, it was a budget amendment that I put through that was for the 2021 budget, and it basically diverted 3.5% of the fines and forfeitures revenue stream into a fund to be used for community well-being, to be determined at a later date. The concept was that fines and forfeitures are obviously, fines and things like that paid, that use that money to reinvest back into the community. And I would love to see eventually more money go into that fund if we can make that work in the future. So I personally think this is a great use for the funding that exists there. And I'm excited that it's there so that we can do some work in the Southdale neighborhood going into 2023.
Alder Herbst.
The Commission on Aging, they've identified that there'll be additional seniors that, we probably need caseworkers for, but give me some concrete, we're going to increase what will the money be used for? Give me some concrete things, okay? I don't, give me something to, throw me a bone here, okay?
Do you know how the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative grant works? It's like we invite not-for-profit organizations that they'll do some work in those areas to apply for the for the grant money, and then we can, and then they do some specific project in that area. Like you said, this is a good idea. Maybe through the Healthy Neighborhood program, we can do something, related to allocate some money from this grant money can be allocated to work with some not-for-profit that work with seniors. You know what I mean? So we can.
I gave you, I'm sorry.
No, but that one could be, an example. I don't know. It depends how many, the money can be applied in the Healthy Neighborhood for youth program, workforce, elderly, So there are different categories, And then when they apply, they can bring a project and say, we would like to do this in the Southdale area,
Yeah, maybe you can send me, I didn't quite answer my question, but got pretty close. Maybe
Yeah.
send me some concrete. Would you say youth programming? Are we going to have a summer softball program? Are we going to for workforce? We're trying
So
to
this
find
is
some
what
work training.
One person at a time.
I'm sorry,
one
I'm done.
older.
Can I,
Go
this
ahead.
is where the people that are applying for the grant, they are the one that bring those. Then in the 2021, I give an idea. We provide money to some grant money to the Budget Prayer Need Network, Big Brother, Big Sister. They work with kids.
Yeah. Okay.
Boys and Girls Club. Then we provide to Little John's Kitchen and Restaurant and the Latino Academy of Workforce Development and 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. So that, what I mean. So it depends who are the not-for-profit they are coming to apply. What I mean.
Thank you.
So we don't,
Understood. Thank you.
we need to determine what are the needs in that Southdale neighborhood, And I think the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative Committee has not met in a couple of months, but when we determine one or two needs in that neighborhood, then we can have an idea which are the not-for-profit that we can work with. This is how I will do it. You know what I mean? So.
Thank you.
All right. Anything further, Alder Herbst?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Chad.
I just need to bring up a clarification item for staff if this is ultimately approved. As written, it identifies that there would be funding added specifically for the Southdale neighborhood, and the H&I grant program does not necessarily specify funding breakdowns by specific neighborhood. It just says that the grant funds are eligible for use in one of the identified priority neighborhoods. So I just need to know, staff will need to know if this funding is added. I mean, ultimately, I assume we'll be adding the Southdale neighborhood in as an H&I neighborhood specifically. But again, we're going to need to know for clarification if this money is specifically identified for the Southdale neighborhood or just simply added into the H&I grant funding pool.
Mayor Richards, go ahead.
I think that just the biggest concern for me is what's in the finance director's notes, and that it is it's actually adding to an already established structural deficit for next year, and that's just a bad policy choice. Now, the one we have, it's for two very good projects. It's Hub Phase 1 and operating that, and it's for the additional transportation mainly in Southdale, but throughout the city. So those are very good things, but we're already $125,000 roughly in the hole for next year for a budget that hopefully is good, but we don't really know. So I guess that's just my big concern, is that adding to a structural deficit is always a bad policy choice, but we have one for next year. It's for two very good projects. I'm not saying we shouldn't have done those things. We absolutely should. But adding to that now is concerning to me.
Alder Rutherford.
Yeah, my comment is that, this could be using the fund that they are there right now for one time to include for next year the funding to the Healthy Neighborhoods Grant. It doesn't mean that we need to, maybe next year, there are more money in the budget that we can allocate more to the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, But what I am telling right now is how we can use those funds that they are already in the well-being fund to include it for next 2023 Healthy Neighborhood Grant Initiative. It doesn't mean that we have to do it like every year, because I know that we don't have the fund. But eventually next year, maybe we can allocate more funds to the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, instead of the 63,000. But I am adding this 15. I can compromise to 10 if people feel comfortable taking from that well-being fund to add more funding to this Healthy Neighborhood Initiative Fund to have more grant money to allocate in 2023. That's it.
Is your amendment for a one-time, or is it to continue, or what is your thought? I mean, you spoke to it just now, but I'm looking for a little bit of clarification, that's all.
Because I know how much money this fund collects every year is $5,000. So I know that I cannot say that we are going to, use $10,000 in a fund that only collects $5,000 a year. No, I know that. I do my math. So what I am telling is that using some of the fund that they are already in the well-being fund to increase the funding for next year for the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative grant. If you want to say one time, yes, okay. I compromise and say one time.
Okay. Additional questions, discussion? Alder Gerhardt.
Yeah, so Misty, just a question about the structural deficit. So if the following budget, if we didn't have that money there, we could just not allocate money in 2024 to the Healthy Neighborhood. We could just reduce the budget and not, do you know what I mean? Like, 'cause it's ultimately it's all one-time use, right? We're just giving out yearly grants. We're not committed to a multi-year grant to any organization. So I guess I just don't see it. I guess I personally don't see it the same way, because it's not like we're hiring a staff member that we'll have to pay them into the future. It's just next year we could just not allocate $5,800. And that's an easy, just decision we make in the budget for next year. Is that, I know it's kind of more of a comment than a question, but I was hoping you could comment on that.
Yeah, so I think it all goes back to what Randy's question was, is this intended to be an ongoing grant program? If so, then it is a structural deficit if you're planning to continue this in the future. If it's not, this is a one-time infusion of grant money just to Southdale, then it is a one-time thing and it's not a structural deficit. So I did point out that it's if this grant program is expected to continue.
Okay, very good. Yes, go ahead, Chad.
Misty, could you further comment on how we would track in the operational budget that this was identified, if it is identified by council as a one-time use of the funds until they would build up to significant amount again for potential an additional one-time use?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing would have to be on expectations with the granting agencies. Make sure that they understand that the $63,000 that's been in the budget the last couple of years is, no guarantees, of course, but it's expected that would continue, that this $15,000 is going to follow the same program guidelines, but is a one-time grant program specifically for Southdale, perhaps, depending on what council chooses. So I think it's more in that education to the granting agencies. I want to make sure that they were clear and not expecting it to be ongoing. And then as far as kind of the accounting of it, so the Wellbeing Fund is a separate fund. So in our accounting records, it's kind of like its own little business unit. So everything would be tracked there. If we award grants and they fall through, that money would continue to stay within the Wellbeing Fund. We would charge it directly there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Allen.
Yeah, Misty, I just want to get back to this structural deficit thing. You specifically called out this amendment as being a structural deficit, but on, for instance, the urban forester going from a 0.8 FTE to full-time, you did not. How do you see these two things as different?
Yep, so in order for the forester position to be increased, something else will have to give. The plan would be that you'd have to use property tax money in order to pay for it, so property tax money would have to come somewhere else. The reason why this one's different is it's funded not from one-time money, it's funded from fund balance that's been accumulated so far.
Gotcha.
Alder Wheeler.
Never mind, no.
Never mind. Further discussion? All right, seeing none, we will move on to amendment number 6. Amendment number 6, sponsor is Alder Gerhart, adjust funding for sustainability plan phase 2. Alder Gerhart, you have the floor.
Thank you. So this one is sort of interesting. So you may have noticed at the meeting last night that we referred out R-20422 for consideration on November 1st. And it is, I worked with Misty. Let me take a step back. There was no money for sustainability funding in this budget. I could not find $25,000 to add to it. It just wasn't there. So I talked to Misty about potentially allocating some vacancy savings in the staff budget for this current year rather than looking for the money in 2023. Misty identified $25,000 in staff vacancy funding that we could apply and for an additional amount of money for the sustainability plan. So that resolution is coming on November 1st separately. And again, it's not affecting, it'll be rolled over because there's no way we can get the plan done in the remaining time. So that money will be identified this year and then rolled over into 2023. This amendment is actually taking into account some money that was allocated in the 2023 budget. So $10,000 in TID funding was identified to add to the sustainability plan, which is great. But if we do pass that, there's no real reason to allocate that TID funding to it if we're funding it in this year's budget. So this amendment really is just assuming that passes. There's no reason to allocate that $10,000 as well. So this budget discussion will have to happen at the end of the meeting. So after that R-20422. So we'll consider this at that point, depending on the outcome of that vote. I hope that makes sense, but I can explain more if anyone needs it.
So it could be a moot point.
Yes.
Discussion? Hearing none, we will move on to amendment number 7. The sponsor is Alder Maldonado. Reinstate funding for Part 3 of the Teen Center study. And I understand, Scott, that we have a video since Alder Maldonado is not here. Is that correct? Okay.
He's very quiet.
Yeah.
Greetings, council, mayor, and the public. This is Joe Maldonado. I am speaking on behalf in the 2023 municipal budget for budget amendment number 7 related to the Fitchburg Teen Center. As you all know, I introduced the CIP amendment in 2020 that passed on council to be able to work towards a plan for a permanent space for young people, particularly older youth, in the King James Way, Verona Road West area. This is one of our H&I, Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative neighborhoods, and it's long been identified as a place that is a youth service desert. There's a lack of options for young people. Also, more broadly in the Madison area, there's a lack of options for older youth, particularly teens. The public spoke heavily in favor of this over the past 2.5 years at council meetings. that this issue is very important. And this year, what's special is we've been actually able to complete part one of a 3-part study, a community engagement study led by Equity by Design. 390 people were surveyed, over half of them being teens. And across demographic groups, across age groups, there was overwhelming support for the concept of a teen center. Part two of the study, which will be a design study, where we hope to hire some sort of an architect or designer to draw some preliminary designs of a space, is in motion and will be budgeted. It's budgeted for this year, and hopefully will be an RFP will go out by the end of the year. But I'm arguing for part three, which is a feasibility study. That feasibility study is yet to be determined, but essentially the elements of what it would look like would be that we would have an idea of how the space will operate. In other words, what organizations are best to be able to serve teens based on what was said in the engagement study. Should it be mental health organizations? Should it be employment organizations? Should it be recreation? Should it be career development, financial literacy? That process will be able to flesh out what are the best groups to be in the space, and what is the best structure in terms of rent to the city, in terms of who should be in what part of the building. How can this project be sustainable ultimately? And this is a really important part of the study. So I'm going to have Alder Gearhart answer any questions that the council may have, but of course you can reach out to me, and I will be at the council meeting on November 1st. So again, please support budget amendment number 7. Thank you.
And with that, just to reiterate, Alder Gerhart will be answering questions if there are any. So I'll open it up to discussion. Alder Wheeler.
My only comment is expectations with this project. And, you even look in the documentation, where it says that, have overwhelming support from businesses, in-kind, donations, and everything else like that. I would like to see numbers. When the Alder proposed this, it was tens of thousands of dollars that were going to be raised for this project. And, a lot of this is based on grant funding, basically aspirational. And I'll say it again, we're going to be moving into some heavy budget discussions. We got the town of Madison, which, we're going to be taking on just EMS calls, 600 calls. And already the chief from Fitchburg is talking about needing 6 extra paramedics just to service those calls. And I just think the expectations of Keith saying this is, so overwhelmingly, supported, and that all this financial assistance is coming in, I think we should see it. When the senior center said that they wanted to build a slab patio, they came back and, it's going to cost $50,000. A month and a half later, they came back and said, we got $40,000 for it, for that support. And I just think we need to be very transparent with the community, because this is going to be a heavy burden on the taxpayer, because it is going to come back on the taxpayer. Already I'm concerned even about the hub, when last year we were told it was going to be $60,000, $70,000 in operating costs. And now I'm hearing that it's going to be $125,000 in operating costs. So we need to be really, really careful how this is presented, because when expectations aren't met by the public that we are giving them, that leads to mistrust in government. So I just think we need to be very transparent. That's not saying I don't support this. But the other thing I do want to know is why we're not going to do the feasibility study first and then design.
Mayor Richardson.
I guess that is a great segue to my confusions, I guess, is that I remember last year, Randy, you sitting down here and being very, very adamant that Phase 2 is for feasibility. Okay, I will vote for that. So I guess my expectation based on last year's budget was that Phase 2 is for the feasibility, which I think is very important. I don't know why you would design something without knowing what you even need, what makes sense, what are other organizations, other communities doing close by. And so all those things seem really important. And, I'll say this again, I'll keep saying it. This is something that a nonprofit is going to have to run. The city isn't, I don't see the city being able to run this. And I would think that once you have someone willing to do this, and I don't know if anyone is yet, you would want them part of the design also, because they're going to have feedback and input and things like that. So I think, that's my concern, a couple of my concerns. I think that, he wants to take TID money out of the TID that we're closing. And I don't think that we should be doing that outside of the TID process. We're going to do it like we just did a year ago. What are all the projects? What makes a lot of sense? And this is going to be in there, obviously, but why isn't this part of that process in the spring, or I think February is when I think Missy is talking about possibly doing that. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I think phase 2 should be this feasibility that I thought we were clear on. And maybe this is another cow topic. I know we've talked about a lot of things we need to talk about a cow, but I think the next one is in January. And to me, this is important enough to be on that January cow meeting, because there seems to be some confusion where I thought it was pretty clear last year that people who were voting for phase 2 said it's for feasibility, but now I'm hearing people saying, no, it's not. Well, wait a minute, I thought it was pretty clear at that point in time. But since there is that confusion, there's a lot of steps that need to happen. Feasibility has got to be a big part of that. And what's the structure going to be as part of that? We do have a community center in the city, the senior center. We don't support that enough right now. We talked up in here, and I think we all agreed up here that we need to be doing more with that, especially among transportation. So really, we're not supporting the one that we have enough. Before we add more, I'd like to see more transportation at least added to the senior center. I don't know what the senior center costs us to operate, but I'm guessing it's more than $500,000. And I don't know where $500,000 is going to come from the city to operate this, which is why we need some kind of nonprofit to do that. And that's where I know other communities, nonprofits, are running these things, but that's part of the feasibility and the structure. And to me, that should be part of this phase 2 process that we're going to do maybe the end of this year. And that's where I guess there's a lot of steps that need to happen. Designing the building should be one of the last things that we do, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to underscore, a number of your points. I do remember sitting there last year making the same statement. And I've been stressing it all along. I think it's a great project, but my own personal experience from my professional career, you got to know what the dollars are you're working with to begin with. And I thought we were working and moving forward with a feasibility study to bring this project to fruition. And I find it very difficult to see a design first before the feasibility. So with that said, anyway, that was my understanding. So with that, I saw Alder Gerhardt's hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just communicate what my understanding is, and if any of the staff have feedback too. My understanding was that the phase 2 was in progress when Wade was still here at the city, and that he was the one that designated exactly what the RFP would be, which is why it's being called a design. And then the phase, so that was my understanding, was that it was something that Wade had put together prior to his leaving, and that this was how he saw the process going through from stages 1, 2, and 3.
Go ahead, Chad.
I can comment on that. I was not involved in any of these conversations, obviously, until the last 15 months ago. My understanding is also that Wade Thompson was the staff consultant on this as far as what the process would be. I'm not aware of any other conversations that Wade had with other city staff to include the planning director, who he reported to at the time. I've spoken with our current planning director, who has sought feedback from her staff as well, and I think the consensus from current staff is that phase 2 would be a feasibility study to determine what the structure of this arrangement would look like, how it would operate, who might be a suitable tenant to be in there, what would be the fee structure necessary to minimize impact on tax levy, and just as importantly, which city department and or staff people are going to be responsible for this particular amenity. So no work had been completed to my knowledge by Wade on phase 2. So there has not been an RFP developed for that yet, is my understanding. So we are at a juncture where phase 2 has not been started, recognizing disagreements in council on this particular portion of the project, i.e. what specifically will phase 2 cover. I think it will be important for council to provide direction to staff on how to write that RFP, whether it's for feasibility related matters or whether it's for design. So I think that this conversation will be very important to provide that direction.
Alder Gerhart.
It looks like Misty included the CIP document as part of this document, and on page 2 of that CIP, which is I guess page 21 of the of the whole budget amendment packet, it says that 2022 to 2231 CIP Council Amendment added feasibility study funding of $30,000 in 2022 and $40,000 in 2024. So it sounds like it's feasibility for both phases, and I guess it's being called design. I guess design to a certain extent is related to feasibility. You can't really decide how people are going to fund it if you don't know the size. I don't know. I'm not the person that wrote the. If there's no RVP written, obviously there's some flexibility. But I guess I'll just bring it back to. I understand that maybe there's some things that staff has to work through, but I would just bring it back to. I think this is my personal opinion about the $40,000. I think it's good to plan to maybe dedicate to some TID funding later in the year. This phase 2 won't be done, is not bid out yet anyway, so there's some time for us to figure that out. But it would be done earlier next year to mid next year. So I think in terms of a budget amendment, I think declaring that the council is interested in continuing with fitting out the feasibility with the TID funding that potentially is there later in the year. Obviously, that's TBD, but I think the timing is pretty well in terms of funding it. It's not coming from taxpayer, tax levy, so it reduces that burden that we have to make sure that things stay low in the tax levy. So in terms of the amendment, I think the spirit of the amendment is still very valid in terms of making sure that we are planning to dedicate money to the third part of the study so that we really can understand how this will function. And what Joe has laid out in the rationale is about, all the different organizations that would be involved, what the rental structures could be, all of those types of things are the funding elements in my mind. And so I do think this part of the grant process is this part of the study process is going to be important. And so I do think this amendment is important. And obviously the details of the RFP are still TBD based on planning staff. And I know we have a new staff member in that role.
Yes, Alder Allen.
Yeah, I think we're getting awfully hung up on the text here about part 2, about phase 2. We already approved phase 2. We already have funding for phase 2. We are not going to get architectural plans out of phase 2. That's, I don't know what Joe was thinking when he put this particular language in here, but clearly that's not part of what's going to come out of phase 2. My understanding is that this was going to involve looking at possible locations. Where could this thing be? Getting some input from the potential users of this facility as to what kinds of things they would want, and maybe putting together some preliminary cost estimates as to what it would cost to run that sort of programming. So, we're spending a lot of time arguing over about 10 words in this description, which probably don't really reflect what we already approved. What we already approved was a feasibility study. That's what we approved. That's what there's funding for, and that's what's stalled now because we had a staff vacancy. So I don't, despite what's in here, I think looking at phase 3 and presuming that the council wants to continue with this project, which may or may not be accurate, I don't know. But I think continuing with phase 3, at least having the funding available for the middle to the end of next year, makes some sense. Now, if the council wants to kill it, the council can kill it. But I don't, people write stuff, and it's not always completely accurate. I know what we approved last year for phase 2 was a feasibility study, which maybe doesn't fit exactly the text that Joe wrote in here. That doesn't really matter because that's what we approved. So hopefully when we get a new staff person on board, we'll get through that. But and many of the questions that are being asked right now will be answered.
Alder Wheeler.
I'm just going to disagree a little bit, Jay. What's in here is what the public reads. And we need to be very transparent, because I don't know about your constituents, but my constituents will be asking about this. So it got to be very clear.
Well,
we just can't say, well, just because it says it here, we know what we did.
Then
Reads this. It got to be very clear.
If that's the issue, then the appropriate action to take would be when we come back to vote on this, amend this rationale to include the language that we already approved for phase 2. So, I mean, there's no reason why we can't just lift that language out of what we already approved, paste it in here over what Joe wrote, so that it's consistent. I don't think it's a transparency issue. I think it's a consistency issue. I think, Joe's really into this project. I mean, he's really enthusiastic about it. And sometimes, when you get that enthusiastic about something, you write stuff without really thinking it through about what you're writing. And so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this and just say that what he wrote here for phase 2 isn't what we approved exactly. It's kind of what we approved, because we did talk about getting the input from the users, and we did talk about looking at potential sites. I think right now there's some confusion over draft designs, and I don't even know how you would do that until after you've figured out what a site is that you're going to use. So, I mean, what he wrote in here is something you can't actually do. So I don't have a problem with saying, let's go back to what we approved last year. Let's lift that language out for phase 2 and put it in here, and then everybody knows what we're talking about. But I think if we intend to continue with this project, we should put this funding back in so that when we get to the end of 2023, hopefully the feasibility study will be done, and then we can start looking at this in a little more detail.
Mayor Richardson, go ahead.
I think to me, that's why I feel like almost the direction for this amendment would be make this as a priority project in the TID planning that we're going to do in the spring. And because phase 2 is not going to be done until probably late next year anyway.
When is that TID planning to close?
Well, we're going to do it in February. So that feeds into the CIP, which feeds into the operating budget for next year. And if like we did this year, there's some projects that we put in the TID funding in February that we expedited and did sooner. So that's a possibility if the feasibility is done in July, for example, and it's, all right, this is the next step, makes a lot of sense, and we want to start right away. That's a possibility. We did that this year for tennis courts and a few other things as well. So that's to me where I feel like it's getting a little bit cart before the horse. If we want to just make it as, hey, this is a project that we for sure are putting into the TID planning that we're doing in February, yeah, I mean, obviously I think it should be and would be in there. But to allocate money outside of that process, I don't know why we would do that.
Alder Herbst.
The only comment I had, kind of follow up on Alder Wheeler, show me the money. We hear about all these grants, all these powerful people that are on the committee. I donated to it, but if this moves forward, we need people to step up. We can't just say we're going to get these grants from the government, which come with all these, all these tentacles that end up costing you more. People need to step up and give the council some confidence that people are going to write checks to help support this, and we're not going to ask the taxpayers to, pay the whole bill. And that's the way I see the snowball going right now. So that's the only comment I'll make on it.
Alder Gerhart.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say it sounds generally like there's support for phase 3 of the study. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I guess there's lots of detailed, conversation about the details, but I think ultimately, I think it's a good use of TID funding. It's one-time funding. It's there. I don't see anything wrong with making a decision as a council that we want to allocate this money in the future, even though it's not completely done yet. I think it's a good use of the money. There's strong support for continuing to pursue the project, and I think we should make the declaration that we're not, just because it couldn't be included in the budget originally, that we should make a statement that we're willing to move forward with this project by continuing to study it and figuring out the feasibility. And very much part of this feasibility study will be figuring out how the funding will be structured. It's a key part of it, and I think that's what we need to figure out. That's the unknown that I think is getting people worried, and that's for good reason. So I think we should support this study. We should support making sure that we know that this should be a priority for that one-time use money, so that we can figure out how this is going to be funded. And that very much is laid out in the rationale about how this money will be used. So.
But, okay.
I could be wrong. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from the council, but and please excuse me if I'm wrong. It sounds like there's some details, but that people generally want to continue studying the project and figuring out how it's going to work.
My other concern with that comment, though, I mean, if we don't issue or amend what's stated, as Alder Allen has stated, then we are moving forward with draft designs as well. So, I mean, I think that there needs to be clarification here. So, Alder.
Yeah, just to Dave's point, I appreciate what you're saying, Dave, but you can't go out and do fundraising until you tell people what you're fundraising for. So you brought up the senior center as an example, and the senior center said, we want to build a patio. The patio is going to be this big, this is how much it's going to cost to build it, and these are the amenities we want to provide. And then they went and did the fundraising after they had nice drawings that showed what it might look like. That's how this kind of thing works. I mean, you have to invest some money up front to say, we want to build a teen center. It's gonna, and we want you to give money to it, but we don't know what it's gonna look like. We don't know where it's gonna be. We don't know what kind of services it's gonna provide. We don't know anything. We just want you to give us the money. It doesn't work that way. You know, any type of big fundraising project that you've ever seen go on has started with somebody investing some money to come up with some draft architectural plans that show like a 3D rendering of the building that says, you know, this is what we want to do. Here's a list of the types of services we want to provide. Even when Michael Johnson goes and raises money for big projects for the Boys and Girls Club, he's always got big pictures of stuff that, you know, this is what we want it to look like. This is what we think is going to happen. So I think, you know, we probably have to get through phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 before any realistic type of fundraising is going to happen.
Alder Wheeler and then Alder Herbst.
I don't want to belabor this, but I'm a simple person. I just want to go from point A to the end with just a clear plan. And I don't think it's too much to ask for a clear plan. I mean, that's what we've been asking for since this project began. And it just seems like every time we come back to it, we got to change the language on this. There's misunderstanding. Let's just have a clear plan on where we're going with this and stop putting it out to the public like this is going to be done tomorrow, because it's not going to be done tomorrow. And I'll go back to what the alder said. The alder was the one who came up and said he was going to raise tens of thousands of dollars. So this is something that we made up here. He said he was going to raise tens of thousands of dollars to get this done, and he knows people that's going to use the space. Only thing is, just put it out there then. And let's just get this done. I mean, this is going to fail if we just don't come up with a solid plan of what it's going to be, because there's going to be just way too much confusion out there. So let's just get it done right. That's all I'm asking for. Because like I said, I'm a simple-minded person. I just need to go from A to finish.
Alder Herbst.
I'm much simpler than Alder Wheeler and agree with everything he said.
All right, additional discussion. Hearing none, we will move on to the next amendment, which is amendment number 8, and Alder Gerhart is the sponsor, add funding to the pilot sustainable vegetation in street medians. And Alder Gerhart, do you want to speak to your amendment?
Thank you. So this is pretty much exactly what we discussed in the budget last year, and also in the TID and ARPA funding, because I keep bringing it back. So, ultimately, this is just a matter of long-term reducing costs associated with mowing grass in the street medians. It's going to always cost money to mow it if we decide that we keep having vegetation that requires mowing. And as I called out, $72,000 in 2022, bumped up to $94,000 in 2023. Maybe we'll bump that down, but obviously that's TBD depending on how we vote. But the contract is up in 2023, and I very much believe that price will jump significantly at that point, and to a point where we might not even be able to pay for it at all. I do think we just need to move towards planting something that does not need to be mowed. I don't think that those things exist. It does not have to be turf grass. There can be other things that have other benefits in addition to just not needing to be mowed. It could be pollinators, could be, deeper roots. But ultimately, street medians are unique. They require salt resistant, so it's not like planting a native area in the park. There's some special needs for it, but it can be solved. There are some interesting ideas out there, and I think that if we invest in this now, that saves money down the line. If we're able to transition our street medians to something, you're talking about what, $50,000, $100,000 a year every year into the future, and obviously it would be more than that if we continue doing mowing. It's just it's a snowballing cost, and I think we need to start dealing with it right now. And I think it's good to provide this funding now so that we can start planning and then do something come spring, because we also continuing to redo our roads. We got West Lacey Road potentially happening, Cyene Road. There's always going to be more street medians going in, and the easiest way to do this is to not start with turf grass. Start with something different. But I think we need to do a pilot first. We need to figure out what those different plants options are. We need to start thinking about the logistics of installing it. So I really hope that the council will support this, and hopefully we can get something going over the winter, so that come spring we could potentially try something out.
Alder Herbst.
I agree with your plan. What I would like to see done, though, Gabriella, first of all, I'm not in favor of any pollinators in the meridians, because the cars are just killing all the bees. I think that's doesn't work that well. But a grass that doesn't have to be mowed, I think has great value. But I think we should do an economic analysis to see what the payback is. If it's $100,000 per acre to put this in, I don't know what that cost is. But if you know what that cost is, we know how many square feet we're mowing. You can put an escalator in, what we're paying for it, and you can figure the payback. And I would like to see that. I used to be able to do this on the back of a cocktail napkin, but it's a fairly straightforward engineering analysis to figure that break even point, and I'd like to, if we're looking at it, we're saying, it'd be 30 years, then maybe let's think of it, maybe let's evaluate. But if it's 10 years, I think I'd like to have that number. I'm supportive of this, but again, kind of back what some of the other alders are saying about the last amendment. Failure to plan is planning to fail. So let's if you're a pilot, you can figure out what the cost is per acre. Figure out what you're going to use, figure the cost per acre, and then I'd like to see the numbers before we decide which direction we want to go. Does that make sense?
All right, very good. Additional questions, discussion? Chad?
I just would like to add a point to this. I'm sensing from the conversation in the council in regards to median mowing, sustainable vegetation in the street medians and so forth, that even recognizing that obviously Anna has some capacity issues, much like many folks throughout city staff, city departments, I do wonder if maybe perhaps an approach would be is to request or direct, however you want to look at it, Anna to prioritize some of her time to at least prepare a preliminary assessment for the council to consider what options might be appropriate to plant in the medians, what might the cost of planting and maintaining those be, and what other municipalities have implemented similar projects with northern climates to help guide the decisions that the council is about to consider here. again, I recognize that there's some capacity concerns there, but I do think that it seems as though in order to make a decision on this, additional information seems to be requested by the council.
Fair enough. See no further questions at this point. We will move on to the next amendment. Amendment number 9. The sponsor is Alder Gerhardt, and it's increased funding for the Swan Creek Monitoring Station. Would you like to speak to this, to your amendment, Alder Gerhardt?
Yes, thank you. So the Swan Creek Monitoring Station was installed in 2021. It is the first of its kind in the city of Fitchburg, and these monitoring stations are throughout Dane County. They're run by the United States Geological Survey, USGS, and the municipalities invest, USGS invests, and also a lot of local volunteer organizations do some of the sampling on a volunteer basis, such as the Lake Wabisa Conservation Group, I think the Clean Lakes Alliance, all sorts of different organizations are helping out. And really the stations are just collecting data. You can actually look it up on the website. They have daily kind of information coming in, rainfall amounts, water flow, and then also sampling different types of doing some sampling of the water and actually doing some analysis of what's suspended in the water. And overall, the point is that our stormwater utility is not just to control, high water flow events and move. It's also to control pollutants and suspended solids. And we actually have requirements that we have to meet. That TMDL studying that we talked about for the CIP process, that's the type of studies that we're required to do to show that we're responsibly navigating or responsibly monitoring our stormwater and moving it through in a way that's helpful to the environment. And so the Swan Creek Monitor Station is our first chance to really have data to drive and assess whether or not we're doing that well, and also to kind of help us understand the impact that we're having, so that when we're doing studies and we're meeting requirements, that we have the data to back it up. Last year, and I say last year, actually I misspoke. It's this year. This year, the advocacy groups actually provided a grant to add orthophosphate sampling, but they're not going to be able to do that forever. So this amendment really is just adjusting the funding so that we have both orthophosphate sampling and nitrate sampling. Those are two sampling processes that exist at all the other Dane County water monitoring stations. Swan Creek, since it's new, does not yet have that capability, but this amendment would provide the funding to make that happen. And I provided a document on the second page that explains, it's straight from Todd Studebeck. He's the supervisor physical scientist at USGS that works, he's the one that helped install the monitoring station. He's the one that does a lot of the sampling. He kind of explained the value of orthophosphate and nitrate. Orthophosphate in a lot of ways is actually, it helps decide where the contamination is coming from, and actually helps you decide mitigation practices. So you can basically tell if some of the phosphate is coming through from actually like when construction projects are happening, you have to stabilize the ground. You can't just let a whole bunch of sediment go through. You can actually find out if that's working based on this measurement. And so it actually can tell you very specifically how to adjust policies to make our streamwater better. Nitrates are a different one in there, and they're very much part of the long-term, like overall environmental context that we're looking at, because all of this water ends up filtering down into the Gulf of Mexico. That's, those dead hypoxic zones have become more and more of an issue, and the issue is coming all the way from up north, up here, all the way down south. So there's a lot of effort to kind of follow that nitrate sampling to figure out what we're doing. And so anyway, I think they're two great sample sets. Again, like I said, it's two things that all the other monitoring stations in the area have. I think it'd be great for us to kind of come into alignment with that. And this amendment just kind of fixes the funding. Because USGS is a percentage, they give a percentage of the account. It's not quite we just had to adjust the funding on both the income and the expense. But ultimately, it's an addition of $7,000 to the stormwater utility budget. And that would make both of those things happen.
Questions, discussion? All right, hearing none. That concludes the amendment. We'll move on to the omnibus. Omnibus Amendment A, adjust Fitch-Rona EMS budget based on EMS commission action. And Misty, look like you're shaking your head. You're going to speak to this. Are you going to speak to all of the omnibus?
I
Okay.
will, yeah.
All right.
So first, some terminology things. So council proposed amendments were the items that you guys were all proposing as changes. The omnibus amendments are really correction items, so things that we either have changed since the time the budget was put together, or if an error was made, that type of a thing. That's what an omnibus amendment would be. So it's led by staff. I'm the one that officially submits them, but they do still need to get council approval. So there's 4 of them for this budget. The first one is to adjust the Fitchburg EMS budget. So the EMS commission met last week. They did vote to increase the budget for Fitchburg. We've talked about this a few different times. So there is an additional levy impact. It's $25,707. However, that full addition is going to be included in that levy limit adjustment that hopefully will be approved by all 3 of the participating municipalities.
All right.
Questions?
Discussion, questions? Yes.
I just
O'Reilly.
have one question. Does the EMS currently have a reserve fund balance, or?
They have a small, sorry for my, they have a smaller one than what they should. So the intergovernmental agreement says it should be between 15 and 25%. It's at, I think, 11% as of the end of last year. So they need to build that back up.
Additional questions? Hearing none. Anything further on that particular one? We're not voting on this.
Correct, just discussion
tonight.
as well.
Yeah. All right, very good. We will move on to the next omnibus. Omnibus Amendment B, adjust for refuse and recycling rate approved by resolution, if different.
So I did not attend council last night, thank you, Chad, but I believe the council approved the resolution as what it was, which means that this omnibus amendment does not need to make a change to the mayor's proposed budget.
Okay. Questions, discussion?
So it's going to go away?
I mean, no. You still have to vote on it because I didn't know at the time. So it says if different, so the
Yeah.
answer is it's not different, but you'll still approve it.
Always the optimist.
I could withdraw it, that's true, that's true.
All right. Very good. Moving on to the next omnibus. Omnibus Amendment C, adjust for transfer out of fund balance, ERP strategy. Go ahead, Misty.
Yeah, so ERP is that expenditure restraint program. So this is one of those state aid programs we want to qualify for because it's about $650,000 a year that we get from the state if we qualify. For the mayor's proposed budget, we took everything that was in the adopted CIP, which included a variety of projects that would be funded by fund balance in the general fund throughout the entire 10 years. And for 2023, we put that whole transfer in. That whole transfer can't all be done in this year, but is a way for us to kind of play with the different calculations to still qualify for expenditure restraint, but not lose any capacity that we might want to use for future years. So this is one very similar to what we've done other years where I've asked for permission to kind of be flexible based on how the calculations and the conversations with the DOR goes. At the end of the day, all we're doing is changing how much money we're moving from one fund to the other, kind of like moving money from checking to savings. Doesn't impact taxes, doesn't really impact anything else. We're just moving money that happens to qualify as a component of this calculation.
Very good. Discussion? Yes, Alder Allen.
Yeah, if, as I recall, it seemed the way that the expenditure restraint program was set up, it was pretty much impossible for a municipality to qualify for it every single year. So we kind of were operating under the assumption that about once every 5 years we just wouldn't qualify. Is that still the case?
Yes. So City of Fitchburg busted expenditure restraint, I want to say the 2016 budget, but then we've been very diligent and strategic about setting aside strategies that we could use for the future. So we've been able to stretch that out a little bit longer. A lot of municipalities did not qualify with their 2022 budget, which is why our payment's a little bit higher than normal. And then for the 2023 budget, CPI is really high or inflation is really high, which is a big component of what this calculation is. So because of what the council has done over the past couple of years, I would hope that we'll qualify for expenditure restraint for another several years.
Okay, additional questions, discussion? Yes, Alder Ferrada. Go ahead.
Misty, what is SCBA and related?
Where are you looking?
I am looking at fund account name.
Yep.
Is there at the table at the end.
Yeah, so that table at the end includes all of the projects in the adopted CIP that were funded by fund balance. And I just listed them all. So SCBA is a fire department project, self-contained breathing apparatus.
Okay.
So again, this, if we pass this amendment, we're not funding that project anymore. We still will continue with it. We're just delaying the time frame in which I transfer the money between the two accounts.
All right. Additional questions, discussion. Alder Rada-Frada.
Do you have any idea how much is going to be this amount?
So right now, what's in there is 2.3 million, and I want to say we're about $1 million over the calculation ballpark. It's included in the mayor's proposed budget, so that would drop the amount that we're transferring by about that much. So I don't have it all calculated now. It depends on what council amendments are approved, and it depends on what Town of Madison adjustment I can get this year from the town, or from the DOR. So there's a couple of pieces that are still out there, which is again why when you approve this, I'm requesting authority to kind of do what I need to do to meet the council's goals.
All right. Seeing no further questions, we will move on to the next. Omnibus Amendment D. Adjust fee schedule to include missing inaccurate proposed fees. Misty.
Thank you. So as part of the 2023 budget process, when council approves the budget, you're approving the property tax levy and you're also approving the fee schedule for the year. So there was a proposed fee schedule included in the mayor's proposed budget. Looking back at it, there were a lot of departments that weren't updated for 2023 that were just blank. Obviously, we want to continue the fees for those. The building inspection fees that were approved this year that were a little bit different weren't updated in the 2023 fee schedule. And then somehow the parks fee schedule got shifted a line. So like we were charging $900 to rent the shade structure at the splash pad, which clearly is not right. There's a handful of departments that are all included in here. This would replace the page that was included in the mayor's proposed budget with the correct and accurate and complete fee schedule.
All right. Discussion. Hearing none, we will move on to C. Again, this is discussion only. Resolution R-186-22, resolution adopting special rules for 2023 budget adoption. Misty, are you speaking to this as well?
I would like to, yes, please.
All right.
So this is the same thing we've done the last handful of years. So the ordinances outline a specific budget process, but it didn't really contemplate that we would have levy limit pressures that we needed to meet. So this resolution, if approved by council, would set kind of supplementary procedures for adopting the budget. Again, the only two changes I made from last year, was that one, the withdrawn amendments, if you withdraw it, you can't reconsider it. And then if you are doing a motion or a second, it doesn't actually count as a time speaking. So other than those two changes, the process would be the same. We'd go through all the amendments, we'd vote, we'd take a break. I'd see if we qualify for levy limits. If we don't, you'd have that opportunity to go back through and reconsider your votes on the different amendments that were included in the original packet. We still do not accept new amendments from the floor. It's just a revisiting of the ones that were included in there. And then we could do this process as many times as we needed to until we get to a budget that meets levy limits.
All right. Discussion. Hearing none. Our next item is announcements. The next committee of the whole meeting is scheduled for January 25th, 2023.
I'll move for adjournment.
Oh, very good. All right, we have a
Second.
motion for adjournment, and we have a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Noes? Ayes have it. Motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:15 PM. Thank you.
Nice work.